30,000 years ago, somewhere in what is now southern Europe, a man took his last steps. He was old, ancient by the standards of his time. His bones were riddled with arthritis so severe that researchers, when they found his remains centuries later, described the condition as crippling. His spine was fused. His joints were destroyed. He could not have hunted. He could not have carried supplies. He could not have run from a predator or crossed a river in flood season. By every metric of prehistoric survival, he should have been dead years earlier. And yet, he wasn't. Someone fed him. Someone carried him. Someone kept him alive for years after his body stopped being useful. That man's skeleton is sitting in a museum right now, and the question his bones raise is one that most people have never thought to ask. In a world with no hospitals, no retirement homes, no social security, no wheelchairs, no painkillers, what actually happened to the people who could no longer walk? Here's what every documentary about prehistoric life gets wrong. They show you the hunters, the warriors, the strong young men with spears crossing open plains under dramatic skies. What they almost never show you is the old woman at the back of the group, the one who hasn't walked unassisted in 3 years, who is being half-carried by her granddaughter through frozen terrain, whose every step sends pain shooting up a spine that medicine wouldn't be able to treat for another 25,000 years. She exists. The bones prove it. And her story is far more disturbing and far more beautiful than anything the hunters left behind. I want you to think about something before we go any further. You are 30,000 years old in your mind right now. Your group has 12 people. Food is scarce. Winter is coming. And the oldest member of your group, the one who remembers where the river bends south, who knows which plants heal infected wounds, who has seen this kind of winter before and survived it, can no longer walk on their own. They slow you down. They consume food they cannot help gather. What do you do? Do you leave them? Do you carry them? Does the answer change if food runs out completely? Hold that question. Because the archaeological record gives an answer that is going to surprise you, and then immediately complicate everything you thought you understood about it. Here is the theory that most mainstream history ignores completely. For most of the 20th century, the dominant assumption about prehistoric old age was brutal and simple. If you couldn't contribute, you were left behind. The survival of the fittest framework, borrowed incorrectly from Darwin and applied to human social behavior, painted a picture of ancient groups as coldly rational survival machines that had no room for the unproductive. It was assumed. It was taught. It was repeated in textbooks and documentaries for decades. The only problem is that the bones don't support it. In fact, the bones suggest something almost the exact opposite, and the implications of that are deeply uncomfortable for the way we treat our elderly today. In 1908, in a cave in southwestern France called La Chapelle aux Saints, archaeologists unearthed a skeleton that broke every assumption they had. The man, now known simply as the Old Man of La Chapelle, was a Neanderthal. He had severe osteoarthritis throughout his spine and joints. He had lost nearly all of his teeth years before death, meaning he could not have chewed raw meat or hard foods. His jawbone showed significant reabsorption, which only happens when you survive for a long time without teeth. He had a healed leg fracture, multiple healed injuries. This individual had been severely disabled for years. And not only did he survive, the placement of his body in a deliberately dug pit, with food remains and possible grave goods, suggests he was buried intentionally by his group. A Neanderthal. 360,000 years before your grandfather retired, being cared for, being buried. Wait, if even Neanderthals, a different species entirely, took care of their elderly disabled members, what does that tell us about what it means to be human? But here is the detail that the story of the Old Man of La Chapelle doesn't tell you. Care and abandonment were not opposites in the prehistoric world. They were options that the same group might choose differently depending on a single variable. And when you understand what that variable was, you will never think about old age, or about scarcity, the same way again. Let's follow the evidence like detectives. Because this isn't one story, it's two stories running in parallel, and both of them are true at the same time. The first story is the story of care. Eric Trinkhaus, one of the world's leading paleoanthropologists, spent years cataloging healed injuries in prehistoric skeletons, Neanderthal and early Homo sapiens alike. What he found was systematic. Healed fractures everywhere, spines fused by arthritis that the individual lived with for years, bones showing signs of severe infection that healed, meaning the person survived the infection, meaning someone tended to them during the weeks or months when they were bedridden and vulnerable. A skeleton found in Shanidar Cave in Iraq, nicknamed Shanidar Worst, showed a man who had survived a crushing blow to the left side of his skull, which left him blind in one eye and likely caused brain damage. His right arm had been amputated or withered from injury. He had severe arthritis in his legs and foot. He was between 40 and 50 years old, ancient for his era. And he had been cared for by multiple people for years. None of this happens by accident. Care, in the prehistoric world, was a deliberate act, a costly act, an act that required other members of the group to produce more food, carry more weight, move more slowly, and accept more risk, so that one person who could no longer contribute physically could continue to live. The second story is harder to tell, because it is also true. Ethnographic records from indigenous cultures studied in the 20th century, cultures that still lived as our ancestors did, document cases of deliberate abandonment of the elderly during periods of acute starvation. Not as cruelty, not as indifference, as a brutal calculation made by people who were themselves on the edge of death. The Inuit have been documented making this choice. Certain nomadic cultures in extreme environments made this choice. When there was genuinely not enough food to keep everyone alive, the group sometimes chose the young, because the young were the future, and the old had already lived. Both stories are true. The question is what determined which story played out. The answer comes from a 2012 study published in the journal PLOS One by researchers Rachel Kaspari and Sang-Hee Lee, who analyzed thousands of prehistoric dental remains to calculate something remarkable: the ratio of older adults to younger adults in prehistoric populations across different time periods. What they found was that around 40,000 years ago, right at the moment of what archaeologists call the Upper Paleolithic Revolution, when symbolic art, complex tools, and long-distance trade networks all exploded simultaneously, the number of older adults in human populations dramatically increased. Not because people suddenly started living longer biologically, but because groups started keeping them alive longer intentionally. Kaspari and Lee called it the evolution of grandparenting. And they argued that this demographic shift, more grandparents surviving longer, may have been one of the primary drivers of the cognitive explosion that defines modern human behavior. The old people weren't a burden. They were the engine. Think about what an old person represented in a world with no writing. Every piece of knowledge your group needed to survive, where the fish ran in spring, which year the berries failed, and what the group ate instead, how to read the sky before a storm that would otherwise kill you, which roots caused fever, and which ones cured it. All of that existed exclusively inside human memory. There were no books, no internet, no recorded history. The oldest person in your group was your library, your doctor, your meteorologist, your map, and your historian simultaneously. Lose that person before they could transfer their knowledge to the next generation, and you lost decades of accumulated survival intelligence in a single morning. Keep that person alive for 3 more winters, even if it cost you extra food, even if it slowed your migration, and you gained a living archive that could save the entire group from a mistake they had never encountered before. The calculus wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. The old person who couldn't walk was, in many cases, the most valuable member of the group. I want you to feel this, not just understand it. You are 45 years old, which in 30,000 BCE makes you the equivalent of a 90-year-old today. Your knees gave out 2 years ago. You move with a walking stick carved by your grandson. Every morning when you stand up, the pain takes your breath away for 30 seconds before your body adjusts. You haven't slept more than 4 hours in a row in 6 months because there is no position that doesn't hurt. You cannot run, you cannot climb, you cannot carry the loads the others carry, and you watch them, the young ones, the strong ones, and you see in their faces sometimes the calculation. The moment of hesitation when they look at how much food is left and then look at you. You have seen it before. You saw it with the woman from the northern camp 3 winters ago. One morning she was there. By evening she was gone. The group moved on without her. You do not know if she suffered. And then your granddaughter sits next to you at the fire, and she asks you again, the question she asks every evening, about the winter when the river flooded from the wrong direction, and how the group found food anyway. And you tell her everything you remember, because that is the only currency you have left, and somehow it is enough. But here is where the story becomes something you did not expect. Revelation 1, the oldest confirmed human burial on record, dating back roughly 100,000 years in a site called Kafse Cave in Israel, includes the skeleton of a child who had severe brain damage consistent with a traumatic head injury sustained years before death. This child was not contributing to group survival. This child was being carried, fed, and protected for years, and then buried with what appear to be grave goods. 100,000 years ago, we were already doing this. Revelation 2. A skeleton found at Romito in Italy, dating to approximately 10,000 years ago, shows a young adult male with severe congenital acromesomelic dysplasia, a condition that would have made walking extremely difficult and physical labor nearly impossible from birth. He survived well into adulthood, meaning his group chose, repeatedly, daily, over years, to keep him alive despite the cost. Revelation 3. And this is the one that changes everything. The archaeological record shows that in virtually every prehistoric culture where we have enough evidence to analyze, the graves of older individuals are more elaborately prepared than the graves of the young. More grave goods. More ceremony. More care in body positioning. The people who could no longer walk were not discarded. In many cases, they were the most honored members of their communities. They were buried like royalty. So here is the question that nobody making content about ancient history wants to ask directly. If prehistoric humans, with no surplus food, no medical technology, no social safety net, no philosophical framework for human rights, routinely chose to care for, protect, and honor their elderly and disabled members at significant personal cost, then what does it say about us that we built nursing homes specifically designed so that the rest of society doesn't have to see the people inside them? The prehistoric group kept the old woman at the center of the fire, not because it was convenient, but because her knowledge kept them alive. We moved our elders to the edge of the frame, and we did it in the name of progress. But here is where our modern understanding of prehistoric survival completely fails us. Because we keep applying a modern framework, efficiency, productivity, individual contribution, to a social system that operated on entirely different logic. The prehistoric group was not a company with a bottom line. It was an organism. And in an organism, you don't amputate a part just because it moves slowly. You protect it, because it remembers things the fast parts have forgotten. Here is the assumption most people bring to this topic, that the history of human treatment of the elderly is a story of progress, that we started cruel and became kind, that civilization gradually taught us compassion. The bones say the opposite. The evidence suggests that the further back you go in human prehistory, the more integrated the elderly were into daily group life. The more their knowledge was valued, the more elaborate their burials. It was not civilization that taught us to care for the old. Civilization, in many ways, taught us to hide them. The prehistoric hunter-gatherer who carried his arthritic grandmother across a frozen river did not do it because his society told him to. He did it because his survival depended on what she knew. We built enough surplus food and institutional infrastructure that we no longer needed what she knew. And so we stopped carrying her. This is the revelation that the bones of 30,000 years have been building toward. The skeleton of the old man of La Chapelle, Shanadar with his withered arm and blind eye, the brain-damaged child of Kafse, the young man at Romito who could barely walk. Every single one of these individuals required their group to make a choice, daily, repeatedly, at real cost. And in every single case, the group chose care. Not because they were saints, not because they had a philosophy of human dignity, but because they understood, in the most visceral and practical way possible, that knowledge is the most valuable survival resource a group can possess. And knowledge lives inside people. The old, the disabled, the ones who could no longer run, they were the most knowledge-dense members of the group. Losing them wasn't a mercy. It was a catastrophic strategic loss. The moment we forgot that, the moment we started measuring human value in physical productivity, is the moment we became, in a very specific and measurable way, less intelligent than our ancestors. There is a direct line between the prehistoric grandmother being carried across the frozen river and the loneliness epidemic destroying the mental health of elderly people in developed nations today. Researchers studying social isolation in people over 65 have found that chronic loneliness produces physiological effects equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It accelerates cognitive decline. It weakens the immune system. It kills. We built a civilization wealthy enough to keep our elderly physically alive longer than any humans in history. And we used that wealth to put them in rooms where nobody visits. The prehistoric group could not afford to lose what the old woman knew. We built so much infrastructure that we forgot we still need what she knows. The cost of that forgetting is not abstract. It is measurable, and it is accelerating. The people who carried their disabled elders across impossible terrain for decades did not do it out of obligation. They did it because they understood something that took us 30,000 years to forget, that the person who can no longer run is often the only one who knows where to go. Every old person in your life who seems to have nothing left to contribute is carrying a library that no algorithm has indexed, no database has captured, and no young person has had time to build yet. The question the prehistoric group asked every morning was not, "What can you do for us today?" The question was, "What do you know that we don't?" That shift in question changes everything. It changed survival rates 30,000 years ago, and it would change them now. The old man of La Chapelle couldn't walk. Shanidara had one working arm and one working eye. The child of Kafse had a brain injury that would have put them in a care facility today. And 30,000 years ago, in a world with no medicine, no surplus food, no institutional support, no philosophical framework for human rights, people carried them, fed them, buried them with ceremony, and then built a civilization sophisticated enough to put them somewhere out of sight. So here is the question the bones are asking you, the question that has no comfortable answer. Did we get more human as we got more civilized? Or did we just get better at pretending we didn't have to choose?